for those of you that don't know, right, with a speaker series is something we do. I mean, I think we do probably 3 or 4 times a year. We try to get somebody in, um, to talk about DEI issues, as they relate to like tech stuff. Something that kind of overlaps with the RSE concerns. Um, so we have had a bunch of different speakers, throughout we've been doing it a couple years now. The DEI working group, we meet twice a month, well, every 2 weeks, basically. Um, it's usually about an hour-long meeting, and we talk about various things. The most recent thing we're working on is the trying to get some kind of a survey. We'll see how it goes. Right now, we're probably looking at like sort of like a culture survey of RSEs. So we have a little bit of data from the international RSE survey about demographics in RSEs, although I think we could use a little more of that too for US RSE. But yeah, sort of taking some inspiration from GitHub's All-In project. We're looking to see if we can probably collaborate with a few other groups and do some kind of a culture survey in research software engineering and see, try to see what things are working well, what things can we improve, and yeah, but if you have other ideas or other thoughts on things the DEI group could be working on, or if you got stuff you want to like talk about or speakers that you want to hear from, let us know. We're in it's WG Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, I think, channel on Slack. And if you have any questions, we have like a minute or so if somebody has a question now. No. I don't know if you want us to hear you, David, but I can't hear you.
Yes, I should unmute myself. Yeah, thank you for vamping since I put you on the spot a little bit and explaining and talking about DI group. I think we have a good mix of people this time, maybe people that aren't part of USRSE in particular. So welcome new faces. If you're not part of USRSE, we're a research software engineering organization here in the United States. Like Lance was alluding to, there's like basically started in the UK, and there's multiple other groups. When we get to Mars intro, like I'll say she just went and talked with the Asia and Australia groups, right? So it's sort of like an international movement or effort, just for people that are doing software engineering but are in research, and we define that as broadly as possible because it turns out that there's a lot of people doing a lot of different software engineering, in all different ways, front end, back end, people that are doing design work. We think that it's all related to research. Like, as you might know, it turns out you can't just do code and actually do research then. You have to think about other things and how you interact with the rest of the world. Unfortunately for people that like just staring at code. So yeah, RSE broadly defined, and we're specifically the organization in the United States. And like Lance was just telling us, we have this DEI group and have been giving this, presenting this series of talks. The other ones are on YouTube too. We have a YouTube channel, so you can go, there's a playlist there if you want to check out the previous talks in the series. But I think now I'll segue over into introducing Mars and getting things kicked off. So Mars Lee, hi, in the carrot sweater. Very glad that you could join us. And you are a technical illustrator at Quansight, which you've just told me how to define in like a sentence or less, right? Which I think so Quansight does consulting for people that are doing stuff like data engineering, especially people that are, I think, in the Python space. So like one of the founders is Travis Oliphant, who helped develop NumPy. it's very important to name drop. So, but they are involved with a lot of different sort of data packages, data engineering in that space. And what's also really cool that they do is there's Quantsite Labs that's more focused on community building and on sort of having a model for sustainably developing open source. Like I see them contributing a lot to PyTorch, for example. So just some sort of like different model that will keep these libraries that we all depend on going. And one thing that they've done in working with the Chan Zuckerberg initiative, there's some funding to develop NumPy. I think that's part of what you've been involved with, Mars, particularly as it is related to, you know, bringing in a more diverse community to develop and be involved with those communities like NumPy. You've been involved with that. You just gave your early career keynote speaker talk at RSE Asia Australia's unconference. Yeah, we need to be cool and have an unconference. Got to get on their level. And I know you from being at SciPy 2022, the conference where at the end of the lightning talks, we were giving a lightning talk that was also karaoke with a Backstreet Boys song that was rewritten to be about the conference that was mostly written by Paige Martin and other people. I won't name drop all of their names now. I just remember that we were singing, I was just standing up there reading stuff off my phone, and then you roller skated by, waving your hands, inciting the crowd to sing the chorus. And I was like, well, clearly this is an awesome person and we need them to come talk with us. So you're going to tell us about stuff you've been working on. I'll shut up and let you tell us about that. But thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, David, for introducing and starting everything off. So hi, everyone. I'm Mars. I'm really happy to be here at the US Research Software Engineer DEI Working Group. So my talk is about drawing the future, making scientific Python more accessible with comics. So you can see some right there. A very quick introduction. I'm Mars Lee, short visual description for the visually impaired. I have green hair, a carrot sweater, and a dangly kid earring. I am a technical illustrator at Quantsite, and fun fact, I roller skate, as you might have learned. I am also part of 2 open source communities, NumPy and Open Source Design. So again, sneak peek, you might have seen me earlier this year, all that fun stuff. And so like, why am I here today? The first reason is they've been inviting me after seeing my sick roller skating tricks at the SciPy conference. The other reason is to highlight a cool project in the scientific Python space. But if we take a step back, there is a bigger question. How did an illustrator end up here in the first place? It's a little unusual. And if we take another step back, this talk can also be considered a case study on the value and need for deliberate and funded DEI. And if we take another step back, like inception level, this talk is also how we could make the future of open source and research software engineering more diverse. Can't promise all that, but we're working with a lot of threads here, and I hope we can have both have fun and to really think, you know. So let's begin. Imagine that you are given a prompt to fulfill how to write alt text for scientific diagrams and documentation, a very lengthy title. And there's a few ways of doing that. Maybe kind of like a white paper, research paper, maybe a brochure or a website. Me, I chose comics. These are also known as my alt text comics. And these comics made their big debut at SciPy earlier this year. And so we distributed them 2 ways. There were 300 print comics and a digital version. And I put the link to that in the Zoom chat if you want to take a flip through. And for me, I think one thing I want to talk about here is comics, comics, of course. I think they are very powerful and engaging. And for these comics, there are 2 parts. There is the story, and then there is the exercise. So you had the characters that show up in the first half, and then they show up later in the exercise section. And so you have the connection between these two parts and a reason to like engage further. Like, what are they going to do? You could whip out your pencil and fill it out like a worksheet or a sketchbook. And I think story is especially important because at the core of all these technical problems, such as digital accessibility, is the human. And through story, we can better understand other people's experiences. And with story, we can also have emotions. We can have fun, or we could express frustration for barriers or show how we think of solutions. These print comics were also tied in with a lot of events happening at SciPy conference, giving them out and letting people take home a copy. It had a whole little setup there, like a bookshelf, a case, or like it was like a comic store. And not only did I table, but also did a drop, a release 200 copies over the entire conference ballroom during a 4-minute lightning talk. I also led all these in-person sprints where the comics were a feature like read the docs, but instead of referencing like a website, you get to flip through the comics. And we combined this physical with the digital, sharing through social media and having both in-person and remote sprints. So that's a lot of a lot of bombast and fun and bragging and blah, blah, blah. But to summarize, comics are really powerful. I think they are a way for us to learn and to laugh and to break down big concepts into bite-sized pieces. It was also very actionable. We had sprint PRs for projects such as Dask, SciPy, OK, and Jupyter. And it's very physical too. It's such a joy to flip through a copy, to hand a copy to people to take back with them in their suitcase and a memento after the conference. And so they are a great way to start small conversations about a big topic. And for many people there, it was their first introduction to accessibility. Sometimes it can seem intimidating, but once you have this little character, the setup, then it becomes something that you can start engaging with other people at the conference too. And because comics are also a little unusual, they invite underrepresented topics and groups. And me, you don't usually see artists here. So like, wait a minute, how did an illustrator end up in the scientific Python space in the first place? To be honest, I've been thinking the same thing. Who am I and how did I get here? And all those comics in that event and conference is a lot of work. It's more than the work of one person, surely a whole team. And so when I kind of asked this question of how did an illustrator end up here, it's very easy to want to believe that one special magical individual just walked or roller skate into this highly specific niche. And it's just, so cool, so cool. But, and it's easy to think, well, that means anyone else could just wander in, that there are no barriers or systems in place that could make this difficult. But it's not so simple. And in fact, there's a lot of support that is happening behind the scenes. And so in this talk, I also want to deconstruct that individualistic narrative. And I want to show that all that I just talked about here is because of many foundational factors. And look, bullet points. These factors are deliberate community building, the funding of DEI, and specifically through the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative Grants, or CZI. So when I talk about my experiences, I really want to recognize this built on the shoulders of giants, and that this was because of the structural and cultural changes in the NumPy community brought by these DEI grants. And so to kind of generalize, you could say it's a case study of being deliberate and funding these efforts, putting money where the mouth is, recognizing structural inequalities that require naming and explicit action. So it can zoom back onto me. So yes, I do have a bit of unconventional start, and you might have in mind what a open source contributor is like, or someone whose work intersects with research software engineering, and someone who knows the code base inside out, has like 2 PhDs, and is expert on like everything before they make the first contribution. And there's certainly people out there, but that's me. That's not me. I'm none of those things. And I thought you had to be like this, plugged into the matrix to start. And little old me, I got this. Does this mean anything? And what I am instead are these things. I am an artist. I am a college or university dropout. And I Google searched free alternative to Photoshop, please, because Adobe subscription software is pricey. And so I had like a long story short where I left college, I moved to New York City, I learned to code, I went to Pi Data, I presented my comic, and da. And so I was already interested in both comics and code at that time. And by very fortunate circumstance, in the audience was name dropping Ralph Gommers. And he is at the time heading a new grant at Quantsite with CZI, with a focus on community building and maintenance. And illustration was a skill that the NumPy community didn't have at the time. And so I was hired. And I do have links to these blog posts if you're curious in the side links. And so this grant funded the redesign of the NumPy website and the creation of the documentation team meetings. And so in these expanded spaces, I was brought in with my comics, my skill sets, my weird, colorful little thingy-bobs, and into like one of the most fundamental Python libraries. It's a bit unusual, but it was much appreciated on both sides. And so if you follow that thread from beginning to end, you end up here. And I made a whole blog post about it. But wait a minute, that blog post was made in early 2020. What's happened in the 2 long years since? And strap in, folks, because there's a lot more that connects all together, and I promise it will all make sense in the end. So when I started, I felt very uncertain at first, but I found strength in community because I did kind of come in as an outsider, but the community was expanded, and there's a whole network of people. This director in turn hired the developer experience engineer, who was in turn the principal investigator of another grant focused on building an inclusive culture. And in turn hired a NumPy contributor experience lead. And so like the building of community can be both like organic and deliberate and structured. And I think in the case of underrepresented groups, we do need to have more explicit like identification of what to do and how to do it. So again, the links to that are in these slides. And so soon I had more support and more people interested in doing the little weird things that I was doing. And they were all very helpful and aware as I struggled at first. And I went to these community calls, even though I felt completely lost and was trying and failing and trying again to do all these things that everyone else seemed to figure out, like branching and Git, and then just also having a place to hang out. And that really helped me overcome my insecurities and some of these barriers about my skills being different, lack of degree, or just like lack of knowledge. And it kind of gave me the realization, these are just perceived weaknesses and that I can turn them to strengths. And so I was starting to feel the momentum to do something bigger. And boy, bigger things were coming. And so this is where we kind of go back to the people. So there was the director, and Quantsite wanted to do more of that community work, bringing in building underrepresented groups and skill sets. And so more personnel was brought in, co-director, boom, more people. And that co-director was the PI for another grant, Inclusive and Accessible Scientific Computing in the Jupyter Ecosystem. And so now we're kind of moving from talking just about NumPy to Jupyter to something wider. And in formation of that, there was a new team focused on accessibility. These very two cool people, one which is, I think, attending right now, shout out. And so in that way, I found other people who cared about accessibility, but who also loved about like comics and zines and art. And so it felt like a kinship with them. And so we hung out. And as we hung out, we started to compare notes, look more broadly at inaccessibilities across different scientific Python projects. We hosted workshops, one which includes research software engineers Asia, and connecting projects to people in the same way that I was. So that is kind of covering another year or so. And then we come into 2022, the fateful year. So we knew that SciPy 2022 was coming up, and we saw the possibility, especially with an in-person event, to combine our skill sets, connections to these projects, areas of expertise to make this killer comic. And it took a long time, a lot of brainstorming and thumbnail sketching of various quality, a lot of editing, a lot of script writing and clarifying with domain experts, and working with marketing and budgeting and printing and shipping, stapling and setup. And it was I had to admit, it was like a lot of work over quite a few months. But I'm really, really glad that we did, because we made something awesome with the community and got to share it with the community, some which I'm sure you're hearing right now. So there's a lot of that happened over there. And so I think it's time that we make some bigger connections. We could go back to the board and I could show you how this is all connected. So when I started this talk, I was talking about me and what I did, but as I kind of went through, it was really because of everyone's support. Everyone over there. And I was brought into the space because of my skill set and background was underrepresented and utilized. And other people were brought in, who in turn brought in other people with a focus on contributor experience, developer experience, and bringing in other people who knew other people with different skill sets, such as UX, UI designers, data scientists, people who knew about accessibility, who were really passionate about things that were not being addressed enough, but now had like the deliberate structure, support, funding to make those things happen. And so in turn, all those things were connected to me. And so all these like connections and these people, there was all these bigger forces that were pushing us together in a good way. And that is the deliberate building of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the scientific Python community across all of these different projects that I just mentioned. And lastly, there is one more person that we could add to this graph. In fact, there is space. That is David, the host. Yes, he's the one that in turn connected me here to this working group, which in turn is everyone else here. And so that is, how everything is. And so, again, if we were to zoom back, take a step back, it all leads back to this talk. All these connections and this work and these people is because we wanted to build something, we wanted to draw the future, and specifically making scientific Python more accessible. And that this again, could be case study, the value of deliberate and funded diversity, equity, and inclusion. And perhaps some kind of weird, convoluted, funny looking model of the future of how open source software and RSE could be more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And so if you want a less convoluted, if you want a written summary, it was because of these 3 foundational factors. And I recognize there's also limits to my perspective. I am not a educated DEI professional. I don't have like solid advice. I'm not in like formal working groups like this. I am not a principal investigator, nor am I formally part of these grants. In fact, I'm more of a benefactor from the structural and cultural changes that other people in front of me have already started to do. And so what I'm talking about here is very much my 2 cents and is very much based on my personal experience. And I also recognize my privileges that affect my perspective. Like, can I even really give advice if I'm not a professional? At the very least, I could tell my story. And while it does look like a success story, I'm compensated for the work that I do here. I live in North America, part of the global North, and I don't have dependents. And so it's easier in terms of money, time zones, responsibilities to make all this fun work that I do. So that is, in summary, my talk. And I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to everyone who's attending here today. Thank you to the organizers, David and Lance. Thank you to everyone listed here, named in appearing order, like movie credits. There's so much more people I can't fit, but if you know who you are, you know who you are. Appreciate you, and thank you. And so, thank you very much. If you would like to connect, you can check out my Twitter and my LinkedIn. And if you would like to meet me, you could send me an email and we could set up a date. Thank you very much.